thought a good topic to talk about today would be looking after ourselves when we're in grief.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of, a lot of people don't feel like doing anything when they're in grief.
Mm-hmm.
It's curl up in a ball and lick their wounds, and they don't know, they neglect themselves. And grief is such a low vibration, and as you know, being a kinesiologist, it's all about energy, and that's what we're running at a vibration.
Well, they might not feel anything actually. You might feel numb. You don't even appreciate how numb you are, if that makes sense.
You're in a bit of a fog.
And
you basically just surviving day by day.
Going through the motions.
Going through the motions.
Yep.
I think it's so important. I mean, obviously there's going to be a point that they can't think of anything else, but then they start to feel that they've got to do something. A lot of the time, you can feel so miserable, and you can see other people moving on with their lives. And this is where you need to really sit and tune in and just have rituals that you do yourself that will give you a feeling of more comfort and looking after yourself. And I think that it's important to go inwards and look after yourself at times like these, and to acknowledge the feelings that you have, because you're going to have a lot of feelings. There'll be a whole lot of feelings that's going to come up for you.
But also, if you're numb and you're stuck, usually you're not moving. So I remember. And I suppose that really helped me with Mum's death, because she was a nurse. Whenever you were sick, she had a real thing that you got up, you had a shower, and you got changed, even if it's into fresh pajamas and fresh sheets and things like that. She was very big on that. And I can see that what often happens is you stop looking after yourself, you stop grooming yourself. The most simple thing of having a shower and getting clean, washing your hair and getting out into the sun a little bit.
Definitely going for a walk, I found helped me.
Oh, walking, because you're moving. You're actually getting everything to flow, which helps you turn down the dial on the jangling of the emotion, but it also gets all your meridians flowing. And it's really important, because it's very easy not to move at that point, I think.
Oh, it is.
To get really stuck.
And I know just with my coaching, Law of Attraction coaching, it's trying to move yourself up the emotional vibration scale. So grief is the lowest vibration. So if you feel anger, that's really good. If you start feeling anger, that's actually starting to move up the emotional scale. It's energy.
Depression is no energy.
Right. So grief is the worst you can be. Grief and depression. So if you've got something that will make you feel angry, that's actually going to improve your being. I actually used oils too, because I thought I was going to, I'd show you a few of the oils. This oil here, these are all pure organic oils. It's the Young Living Joy. Now, when you look at Joy,
good name.
It's supposed to give you joy, but you know what it did? It made me cry every time I used this. And then I realised that I had to cry in order to find the joy. And that is the key to, moving forward in grief.
Crying is helping you resolve your grief.
It is.
Because if it's unresolved, then it's stuck. It's like having a block inside you.
And it doesn't matter if you cry every day. That's normal. You can cry every day, it doesn't matter. I did. I don't know how you found yourself, or yourself, Molly, and Juliet. Did you cry a lot, or?
Well, just relating to my mother's death, which was of course a long time ago, decades ago. There was very little crying, because, as I said, once that she was buried, we didn't talk about her again. And yet, decades later, in the last year or two, I find that I cry. Writing my mother's story through Juliet's Angel has brought up a lot of emotions, and I'm thinking, what am I crying for? But maybe this is the grief that's been stuck from many years back. And, sometimes I get annoyed with myself, get rid of these tears, be strong, da-da-da. But obviously, it just needs to be released.
Yeah, being strong is not such a good thing all the time. I mean, it's good to be strong, but, with grief, it's
overrated.
Staying
strong,
it
I
is,
think,
isn't
is
it?
overrated. That's the culture says stay strong and blah, blah, blah. But there are times when you do need to feel your emotions. There are times to cry, and grief does need to be experienced and felt and addressed.
It does.
And expressed.
Yeah.
Which is what the crying is doing, because what I think is interesting in your story is as you grew and matured, you reached probably a stage in your life where you could deal with stuff that an 11-year-old could never have dealt with. And you had the tools and the resources, and then you could give yourself permission to cry. And I see that as definitely part of the journey too. I suppose that's why I'm a very strong believer in there is no time limit, and everyone is unique, and it's up to you and how you process it. And no one has a right to say, oh, what? They died 20 years ago. Aren't you over it yet?
No, you never get over it.
No, because you now are 20 years further on, and your life experiences between the person dying and where you are now means perhaps you're able to deal with something that you couldn't have addressed earlier. Like when I was pregnant with my first child, I couldn't have addressed the grief I felt then any earlier because I didn't know what it was like to be pregnant.
Yeah.
And I was, there's the hormones, there's all the things that happen to you, but I would go to work and every weekend I would cry all weekend. My poor partner. But I would cry because I really missed my mum.
Yeah.
So it was like, and I look at it and I think, but it was meant to be. So the second time I was pregnant, I didn't need to do that, or the third time. But the first time, I think all the hormones enabled something that couldn't be expressed to now be expressed, even if it was just through tears and a lot of talking and probably lots of cups of tea.
Yeah.
But also, I remember saying to my partner, I wish I had a phone to heaven, because all I wanted to do was talk to my mum.
Yeah, I know
and
that.
now I know that I could have just talked to her. Well, I probably was in a way, but now I'm more conscious. I could talk to her just through prayer or meditation, like you said. Yeah. And that's all it was, is wanting. There's the one person for me at that moment. I didn't want my mother-in-law's advice about being pregnant. I didn't want the doctor's advice or the girlfriend's. The best girlfriend was the one who said, take no advice. She'd already had a baby. She said, everyone will tell you everything and they'll tell you how it should be. She said, and my advice to you is don't listen to anybody, listen to yourself.
Yeah.
Oh, that was the best advice, but I did want my mum's perspective.
Yeah.
And it's often made me think, when you say write a book, I've often thought of writing the book to my children if I wasn't here. If I was gone, then they'd have a book and it would be like, well, what would mum tell me to go and have more vitamin C and you need more sleep? All the things that mums would say, but it would be there.
So what do you think would be other good coping mechanisms that people could employ in their days that make them feel better? I know we talked about walking and then I mentioned the oils.
Journaling.
Journaling is great.
Crucial.
I started a gratitude journal.
Yes.
So becoming grateful for everything that's in your life, grateful for everything that's happened in your life, and it moves you up the emotional scale again.
And it restores your perspective.
It does.
Because at that moment it feels like it's so black, it's so dark, nothing will be good again.
Yeah.
How could it be?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But when you practice just even a couple of bits of gratitude, 3,
yeah.
You go, okay, there is something.
Yeah.
And it gives you that little rung on the ladder, I think, to climb out.
Yeah. Doing something for yourself, something that really makes you feel good for even just for a few minutes in a day. You go for your walk, but it could be just simple as finding a nice corner under a tree with a cup of coffee or a cup of tea and just sitting there and just listening to silence, the birds in the tree. Or
I think that's the hardest thing for people to do, actually, because at that moment when you're in that much pain, often you fill it up with busyness or distraction, or you put the TV on, or nowadays, because it didn't exist when I was 21, you go down the rabbit hole of social media and you just bombard yourself with other stuff, which just suppresses it.
I actually went off social media. It was funny. I saw a lot because I was on Facebook and there was so much stuff on Facebook about Adam that I couldn't cope with that.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And so I actually closed everything down and I went into hibernation as far as that was concerned, which was, I think, a really good thing now that I look back. And then it was a few years later before I went back on. and I was able to cope with all of that. And I had, you know, his friends and things like that. But I think bombarding yourself and trying, but also trying to avoid the inevitable.
Well, that's probably what it is. It's avoidance again.
It is. You can't avoid it. It's going to hit you sometime in your life.
Yes, like on Mount Everest.
Yes. Climb Mount Everest, and that's
Climb
when
Mount
it'll
Everest.
hit you.
Yes, and just have your life changed.
Yeah.
It's when you least expect it.
Yeah.
So yeah,
It's-
it does
it's
need to be
Being in
addressed.
silence, isn't it? Being with nature and
Being outside.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
as you're talking about gratitude, just the simple things. It doesn't need to be cruising Alaska with Oprah Winfrey, which I did recently, which was fantastic. Thank you, Oprah. But being outside, like the morning, about 2 days ago, I just went for a simple walk because I've got a little bit of cold. Wasn't feeling too well, but I thought, no, I've got to get outside. Went for a little walk by myself down by the river. The sun was sparkling on the water.
Yeah.
I just sat on the log fence, watched the sun sparkling on the water, appreciated that. I went for a little walk back, and across the path, a deer was standing looking at me.
Oh, how
And I just
lovely.
stood there, and then it just turned and ran away.
Yeah.
And I just walked home, feeling wonderful. Just
Yeah.
simple things that you are grateful for.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference.
Reignites the awe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 And of course, as you mentioned before, engagement with other people too. And I think when you come open to people you open up about your grief, that's really a big stepping stone towards, you know, moving forward. That's what I've found, because in the early days I couldn't talk about it. I couldn't speak to anyone about it, and it was like my own private little hell. And if I spoke about it, it made it real. I was actually telling people that it happened, and it was like, I'm not ready for that. I can't tell. But everyone knew, but I still couldn't talk about it. It wasn't
there's a
only
few things
later
that can happen
that
there,
I could
isn't
do
there?
that. Yeah.
Because you've got the people who they know something's happened to you and they're really uncomfortable.
Yeah,
so
they don't
they're
know what to
giving you
say
a
to you.
strong message of let's not go there, don't talk.
Yeah.
Then you've got what I call the emotional, I think Christiana Northrup, the doctor from the States, calls them
yes.
vampires.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have called them vampires, but I realised this about a girl when my mum was dying of cancer. She would always want to ask me, how's your mum going? Because somehow or other she was feeding on the grief that I was going through, because my mum was going through a process of dying. And I remember being actually aware enough to go, and then I cut it off. I wouldn't discuss it with her anymore. And that was an interesting thing to realise at a very young age, because I was obviously very energetically sensitive but didn't have any tools at that stage.
Yeah.
So once I became a kinesiologist, I'm much more aware of all of those things. Grief gets in your body in a posture. It can be held in a certain posture. So when you go in that position, up it will come. And it can sideswipe you like a strong wave will knock you over when you're surfing or swimming on the beach. You know, you're down for the count and you don't know why.
Yeah.
You don't know, like you might smell a particular smell, hear a certain song, and you just want to cry. Because all of those things are in our subconscious and they can be activated. So, I just feel that when you said you couldn't speak, to me that's a clear message that your throat chakra is really shut down.
Not anymore.
Really congested, not anymore, no. And they're the things that I would help a person with.
Yeah.
And I've told you this. I've had people walk in for a balance and they start to talk and then they're like, I've never been the same since my mum died or whatever. When did they die? Oh, 4 years ago. And it's like they can pinpoint when their life changed, and it does. It changes your whole life direction, as you know, definitely can change when we lose somebody we love. Mine did. I swore as a young woman on a train here in Brisbane I wasn't going to do what my mum did. I had no idea. I was so young, you think it's choice, don't you? You're like, oh God, you idiot, what'd you have to get cancer for? Couldn't you do something better? You know, and there's part of you that's angry and resentful. All those things, as well as hurting and sad and grieving and feeling so powerless. And I kind of go, well, that put me on my kinesiology track, well and truly. And that's totally helped me transcend it.
I did my kinesiology for 12 months after I lost Adam, and that really helps me. And I think I cried on everyone's table, all of the students. They all knew what they were in for.
Yes.
And I was really lucky to have found a new friend at the time who met me nearly every week. And we would go to a cafe, and I cried every time we were in that cafe. And she was just the best. I mean, she's become my best friend, and she helped me so much. And I think that, you know, it's being away from family. I mean, you know, 5 children and a husband. Well, the four remaining children, you're dealing with their grief as well as your own.
Yeah.
And you know, as much as you are in there helping each other, as much as you can, who's looking after you? And I had that external friend.
Oh, you were really blessed.
Very blessed.
Yeah.
And she came into my life just prior to losing Adam. But it was like 12 months after when she actually became an active friend with me. And
I think they're earth angels, Juliet.
yeah, definitely.
Earth angels.
And she was amazing. And we would sit and just chat about anything, and I was always crying. And you know, she never got embarrassed or anything like that. It was like, just do it, just cry. And she was the best therapy. And I think if, you know, I was just blessed.
You were.
Yeah.
Because my dad couldn't talk to us at all. I don't know, it must be different for men and women.
Well, men express themselves differently with grief.
And he was hurting so much, but he couldn't talk to me. And I was thinking about, and I could talk to him, and I was thinking about that, how we didn't talk as siblings either. Like my brother and my sister and I, we've never talked about mum's death in that way, or how did you cope, or how are you going, or checked in with it. Nothing, because we were really young.
Yeah.
My brother was only doing year 12.
Yeah.
You know, when I think back on it, I mean, you feel so grown up, don't you, at 23? But bullshit. It's like, I look at my own children now reaching that age, and I think they are the age that we were when Mum died. And they're so young.
Yeah.
How could they help each other in that moment when you'd be so shut down with your own grief? And then Dad had no real tools. I think the world is really better now. We know a lot more.
Yeah, well, I mean, you were saying before, Juliet, that your siblings, and you've only really started talking about the loss of your mum in the last couple of years, haven't you?
Yeah.
So you're all
Decades
communicating
later.
about it now.
Decades later, because it was,
Yeah.
as I said, after she was, after the funeral, nobody talked, and you just didn't in that pattern.
Yeah.
So patterns are very strong, and
Yeah.
patterns are not necessarily healthy.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
you're also
Yeah.
not always aware. The subconscious
Yeah.
can hold stuff. So when I do a kinesiology balance, it's amazing what can come out. Like you can, a muscle will show up, and particularly with the hologram, so 2 meridians intersecting at this point. So there's a particular muscle, and you can put the muscle in to its position, and often then people will just talk all sorts of things, and they will go, I haven't talked about that forever. I've never told somebody that, or up it comes, because the body's holding it for them.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how much can be released when you do that.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is all part of things that you can do for well-being, coping.
Definitely.
And the last thing I was going to talk about was diet as well.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's extremely important, because if you're not eating properly as well when you're going through grief, which obviously
very
but
hard
it's
to
really
feed
hard to
yourself.
digest too, because your stomach is so churning,
Yes.
it's churning up all the time because you're feeling, oh, you know.
Yes.
But you know, it's an overall thing that you're really you be kind to yourself. And obviously this is, and I know that it doesn't happen straight away, because you've got to be at that stage where you want to start looking after yourself too. Like, it's really hard for someone to say, you've really got to look after yourself. If someone says that to you and you've just lost someone, it's like, well, I can't look after myself.
But that's why you had the community rally, and
Yeah.
it still happens occasionally for people, but not on any, I don't think it happens enough, where, I mean, to the point of absurdity, you might get 10 beef casseroles, but the whole thing of people would bring meals to the people who'd lost somebody.
Yeah, it doesn't happen so much
No.
these days, you know, and
that's
that's
that thing of they almost appreciate nobody's really got the energy to cook
Yeah.
and eat properly, but equally, as you said, if you're eating very easy junk takeaway kind of food, then that will keep you at that low vibration.
Yeah, you've really got to start eating, even if it's only small amounts of like organic food, fruit and veggies, if you can stomach that instead of having, you know, cakes and McDonald's and things like that.
And staying hydrated.
Yeah, and drinking a lot of water or herbal teas.
Herbal teas.
Dehydration.
You've got to get hydrated.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of things, and even just taking time out, go and watch a movie, something that will make you feel, but also accepting your emotions, but allowing yourself to feel a little bit of happiness and feel some of those positive emotions. Don't feel guilty about smiling, or, you know, because I used to think, well, you know, I shouldn't be laughing.
Oh.
You know, the guilt.
Black humour.
Yeah.
Black humour it can be literally a lifesaver.
Yeah. So I think what we'll do next is we'll look at your kinesiology.